This is Vanessa Irena, and I'm really excited to announce my new store, Sword and Scythe, where I will be offering magical art, materia, and services beneath Mars and Saturn. You can visit the store at swordandscythe.com and be sure to sign up for the email list to receive early access to new releases.
Speak the charm of me.
There will come a time on the planet Earth when science and technology will be long forgotten. When wizards will rule the world.
This is the Arnemancy Podcast. The world is weirder than we know. Join your host, Reverend Derek, and his diverse array of amazing guests in an exploration of tarot, magic, the occult, and the history of Western esotericism. The Arnemancy Podcast exists thanks to the support of generous listeners like you. Please consider supporting this podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy. Welcome back to the Arnemancy Podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Derek, and my guest today is Luxa Strata. Luxa is an artist and magician and the host of the Lux Occult Podcast, as well as the organizer of the Green Mushroom Project, which is an ongoing, large-scale group magical working. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about chaos magic, and we're going to talk maybe about music, and we're going to talk about some other stuff, and that is an awkward way to end an introduction by just saying but so welcome, Luxa. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a huge fan. I just have to say real quick that I'm really, really loving WizBiz. I'm a huge Adventure Time fan, so if people haven't checked that out, definitely take a listen because it's very fun.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's my other podcast project. It's, occult podcasts or podcasts that have like serious topics can be a lot of work, and they can be kind of emotionally draining and kind of exhausting, and it's hard to find guests sometimes. It's hard to find really good topics sometimes, and the WizBiz podcast is just super easy to work on. Like, first of all, me and Alex and I are like splitting all the responsibilities, so it's half the work. But then on top of that, like, we never have to worry about what the friggin' topic is going to be. We know it's going to be the next episode, and so having that sort of easy thing to work on is kind of a delight. It's so much easier to do than this one.
Yeah, totally. And something like Adventure Time, which is so dense and juicy with these kind of like occult truths or whatever. Like, it's so fun. Yeah. I'm so happy about it. So very cool.
Yeah, I'm happy about it too. And we aren't even into the really good stuff yet. The Adventure Time, the first season is great, but it doesn't really get into the deep occult weirdness until later on. But enough about me. Let's interview you. So Luxa, you practice chaos magic. You do chaos magic. Like, in the middle of your podcast episodes, you have a little invocation to Eris, and so tell me, how did you get started with that?
Well, it's been a long and storied road, I suppose, but I think it's kind of something that, honestly, as postmodern people, I think a lot of folks probably do have some shades of chaos magic in their practice, or something that could be, you could draw an intersection with it, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So I do think that it's probably a little bit more familiar to folks than they might realize in some ways. But in other ways, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it, where people think it's there's a lot of silly memes out there about sigils and what one does with them, and sure, but there's a lot of other like anything out there's a lot more that goes into it, right? Like, I think that I'm thinking about how people think about astrology, and they'll read their horoscope in the paper and say, oh, well, astrology's stupid or whatever. How could I be one of these 12 options? How could that work for it? When you actually get into it, it's like, whoa, that's actually a lot more complicated than people think it is, just the sort of layman or whatever. And I think that that's probably true for any occult tradition, including chaos magic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sort of the equivalent of that would be people who think that chaos magic is just, sigils. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, well then let's talk about like what So we know that chaos magic is pretty new. You know, it's kind of invented, or the whole movement sort of started in like the 80s and 90s, right? Like it's not that old compared to most magical traditions. What do you think is kind of the, you know, in its current form, like what is sort of the basic paradigm of chaos magic?
Well, I guess the basic paradigm of chaos magic is that you can step outside of paradigm and recognize paradigm as paradigm. I mean, I guess chaos magic is its own paradigm, but
you can't say paradigm that many times in one sentence. I don't think that's legal.
Well, you're going to have to arrest me because it's going to come up again.
I'm calling Interpol.
Yeah, I think it's just a sort of idea of being able to kind of step outside of thinking about what you're looking at as being like absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and saying like, look, there's a simple way of explaining this might be to say, especially to a postmodern person, to say, look, we have all these different versions of ways of doing spirituality, and there's all of these different techniques that people are using. Some of them have a lot in common, some of them are unique, but people are sometimes getting like the similar things from it. There's an underlying sort of technology there that is true across all of these different traditions. And there's going to be different shades and nuances of that based on like where it is, when it is, who's doing it, circumstances, all of that. It's all going to be very changeable. But the idea is sort of looking at what's kind of behind the curtain there in terms of like, what do all these things have in common? And how can we take that information and build models for ourselves, which are more individualized? That's one way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Other practitioners might define it more as being able to perhaps fully immerse themselves or semi-fully immerse themselves in something like Catholicism or whatever they're interested in exploring, you know, anything, and really sort of like take this ride and really get into it and say, what would it be like to think this way, to live this way? Like, what would that experience be like? While still understanding that you're just entering into that to have this experience. Like, I think there's defining chaos magic is very different because it's very difficult because I think that every practitioner would have their own individualistic definition, which is to say that it's a very individualized practice.
Yeah. I think, I think that is an interesting way to look at it. You know, you were talking about, you know, some practitioners sort of having that, like, the immersive experience sort of approach to different paradigms or different religions or different things like that. It really made me think of, you know, the difficulty we have sometimes, like historians have to do things like that to try to understand how people in the past may have like experienced the world, or even today, like having that sort of skill to figure out how people that, like, you know, are from a different culture, different religious background, or even different politics, like how they're experiencing the world and why they might, you know, act and feel and think the way they do. Like that's a helpful skill, I would say.
Yeah,
even
definitely.
Even if you're not using it for magic.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it just comes down to maybe an idea of like intellectual freedom or liberation, even like this idea of like how far can we sort of expand our way of looking at things, how big can we make the little box that we're in or whatever. I feel like I did a good job explaining the sort of big picture idea of it, but when it comes to actually like practicing it, there's a few like keystones I should probably mention. One of these is the models of magic, right? So there's different folks will have different ideas about what makes magic work, right? Maybe it's spirits. Maybe it's all something about consciousness or psychology. Maybe it's because the world is like informationally based. Maybe it's all energetic forces. I mean, maybe it's somebody like me likes to think that all of those things might be the same thing, and I tend to go for something called the meta model. But there's these ideas of like, you know, whatever makes sense to you in terms of like how your brain works or your experiences or whatever. There's different ways to sort of like get your head around a similar phenomenon and those things don't necessarily have to fight with each other. We can view them each as their own paradigm to describe something else. Yeah.
Yeah, we should talk about those a little bit more because this was something, when I got onto your Discord server, you have sort of like this list of 5 different models. And, I guess I don't really spend a whole lot of time in the chaos magic world, since, though I've been familiar with it, and I guess I sort of I don't know if I consider myself a chaos magician anymore. I kind of feel like everybody is one. But I was really kind of blown away by the magic models because, I'd already thought of stuff like the energetic model and the psychological model and the spirit model before. Like, those are things that I think are sort of commonly discussed across a bunch of different I don't know if they're ever commonly discussed, but I think that, since the spirit model has been sort of gaining popularity over the last couple decades, people have sort of started to realize that there are these different models more. But I hadn't really ever considered like the information model. Like, that one is cool. Let's talk about can we just sort of give a description of all of them? Like, there's 5: the energetic model, the information model, the psychological model, the spirit model, and then the meta model, which is sort of the model where you switch models.
Sure. Okay, so I guess I'll go ahead and start with like the energetic model. I think this is something that people who are into like energy healing or something like that would be able to get their heads around. Yeah, things like that. Like, you're sending these energetic forces. Maybe it's a sort of like animal magnetism kind of thing or whatever. Like, this is some kind of conceptual touchstones that I use for that. I think this comes up a lot with, things like doing, as I mentioned, like healing work and stuff like that. I think that this might be a good way to look at things for that particular situation. The spirit model, of course, very familiar, classic, occulty thing, getting these supernatural entities to assist you with what you're doing, whether they're, small tutelary spirits or larger, princes, or even, the big deity themselves. It's all sort of conceptualized as being these entities that do have their own individual agency. So the psychological model, I think we could probably look to, I think Crowley, although I hate to bring him up, did talk a lot about...
yeah, I guess that is sort of the, that's the one where, you're impressing your will on the world, huh?
Yeah, and I think that there's this idea too where it's like, I think this was Lon Milo Duquette who said this, like, well, perhaps it is all in your head, but you don't understand how big your head is.
That is definitely Lon.
Yeah, it's a great quote, and I love it. And I think that that's a good way of looking at things. It doesn't have to necessarily be one way or the other. But I think that with the psychological model, I think that it's a really good inroad for people who might be coming from like a really materialist standpoint. And you can tell these kinds of folks like, well, these are psychological techniques for self-actualization, which is I think that's an adequate description. It leaves a lot out, but it's still true. So,
yeah. That's, I mean, I guess I have a difficulty with the psychological model because it does sort of embrace the mundane a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah.
But maybe the mundane is more magical than we know. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So the one that really kind of blew me away that I hadn't really thought about before, but it turns out I had been thinking about it. I just hadn't put a name to it, is the information model.
So yeah, this was a little bit squirrelier, I think. I think that, honestly, a lot of the discussions that I hear surrounding this one, especially where people bring up things like simulation hypothesis, which is the idea that we're living in a simulation. Like, yeah, Plato said that similar thing a long time ago. So I think it's kind of...
You just took your cave and added a motherboard.
I mean, right? Am I wrong there? I don't know.
I don't know. When I asked on your server, like one of the people suggested that like Patrick Dunn's work. What's the book that he's language
Postmodern
symbol?
Magic.
Yeah, but also his other book, Language Symbol Magic Power.
Oh yeah,
Is
yeah.
that what it's
Language
called?
Symbol.
I know that there's 4 words, and I may
Magic
have not gotten
Power
the right
Language
words.
Symbol. There we go.
Magic Power Language Symbol.
There we are.
They sort of suggested that book was one that encompassed sort of the information model of magic, and I was sort of like, oh, I love that book. I love that book so much that I've bought it and loaned it to friends 3 times so far, and I don't even own a copy of it anymore. I mean, it's a really amazing book, right? Like, there's a lot of because one of the things he does is he plays with how information works. You know, the information encoded in language, the way our environment feeds us information, and how we can sort of change the way that information is interpreted, or even, you know, stuff like that. And I was sort of like, oh, maybe that's a thing.
Yeah, I do love that. I might almost be tempted to couch those types of discussions within the psychological model, though. But you know,
yeah, maybe. Except,
tomato.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I feel like it falls out of the psychological model when he sort of. I think that the discussion is sort of like, your perception is the collection of information, and I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe it does. I think it's something that does require that. I mean, I honestly have a difficult time splitting the two of those up, except that I know that the psychological model, there's just something about it that doesn't feel correct to me.
Sure, and I similarly have a difficult time splitting the two of them, because information is, to me, so based in my own perception, right? So it's hard for me to kind of get away from that. But, you know, different ways of looking at it will make sense for different situations and stuff. And then we have the meta model, which is the thing I just said just now, different ways of looking at it will make sense for different situations.
Right.
Or perhaps it's something which is not something that we can understand, too complex. And the territory can be described by these different maps, but we can't necessarily visit it, per se.
Yeah, I think the meta model, because I think I like that one too. I feel in a way that there's a kind of unknowableness to magic in general. Like, we come up with these models, but is there one real way that it's working? Do we know what that way is? So, like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of times I'm not really sure what the method even is.
Oh, yeah, me neither. I don't really worry about that. All that matters to me is that it works. So,
all right, back to the green mushroom project. We'll start with the elevator pitch here. This will be the beginning, the official beginning.
All right.
Project.
So, sort of in a nutshell, the Green Mushroom Project is an ongoing group magical working that me and some other folks started back in 2020. And it had some simple objectives, which is to sort of create this, you know, network of, quote, you know, green aspected or Venus aspected or healing aspect, all these different symbolisms that come up with the color green. We wanted to use that to build this kind of like network, this magical network. And from this, we wanted to be able to like build this community, and then also have this community be for the purpose of like empowering people within it, by making them by basically giving them more access to like magical tech and encouraging them to use it. And through this, we were hoping that we could, you know, strengthen the position against some of the gross things that we see happening in occultism nowadays, where we are seeing this rise of these really kind of openly racist groups that are, you know, claiming to represent some traditions and stuff. And so, yeah, this is a kind of alternative to some of that, we're hoping. And so these are the ideas that we had in mind when we started. And I was given a sigil and some words to go with it. And from there, we kind of built out some traditions and things like that. We get together once a week to light a candle at midnight, and we say the words and stuff, hanging out and just, you know, talking about our...
Yeah. When you say get together, are you guys in the same city, or is it geographically spread out? Like, is it just sort of a time that you all do it at the same time?
Yeah, well, we do we host a chat every Fungal Friday on the Discord server.
Fungal Friday.
Fungal Friday. So yeah, for people who are into doing that kind of stuff, you're welcome to come and join us. We usually just hang out and talk about the project. We talk about our magical work. A lot of times philosophical concepts will arise. Sometimes the conversation turns quite blue as well. So if you like, we like to make a joke that, you know, because of the mushroom symbolism the project has, and I hope this is not too crass for your listeners, a built-in dick joke. So
I feel like my listeners are used to dick jokes.
Okay, well, that's good.
Ooh.
So yeah, we feel that, you know, laughter and humor is a really magically powerful thing. So that's something that we definitely try to foster within the community.
Yeah, you know, speaking of laughter, I have to compliment your podcast. Like, the first time I listened to your podcast, I was kind of blown away by how much laughing you guys do on it. Like, you and your guests laugh a lot, and I really, really like it, because most occult podcasts, they're kind of stuffy. so thank you for lightening everything up.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot.
Even if you do have to use dick jokes to do it.
I mean, who doesn't love dick jokes? They're some of the oldest jokes around.
Yeah. So then, so you guys released a zine recently.
We did. Yeah, we were so excited. There's so many talented people, both, you know, kind of directly involved in the project, and there's people who are practitioners who don't have any interest in interacting with us directly, but they still want to sort of, you know, do creative work, do magical work with the hyphosigil current. And we've gotten some folks that have submitted to the zine in that way too. So this is a really fun showcase of some of the very cool stuff that people have been up to, you know, using this current. So yeah, we're really excited about it.
So is the zine mostly written pieces? Is there artwork and stuff in it too? Like what's it consist of?
We've got all kinds of stuff. There's a few games in there. There's some recipes, some rituals. There's some essays, poetry, collages. There's some drawings, photography, other cool stuff that is eluding my mind right now.
And is it available to the public? Like, can people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll give you a link. It's
okay.
We are going to be making a printed version of it, but people can download it for free if they like as well.
Cool. Okay, yeah, I'll make sure there's going to be a link to that in the show notes then, and you guys out there, go check it out.
Yeah, check it out. We've got some great, some of the contributors might be folks that your listeners are familiar with, some really talented folks out there. So yeah.
Drop us some names.
Awesome. Oh, well, I've got, let's see, who we have. Keats Ross from over at Prag Magic. Oh, yeah. Eric J. Millar submitted a really cool thing. Sam Shadow, Adele Soto, Lonnie Scott did a really cool thing for us from over at Weird Web Radio. Yeah, gosh, so many more people who I am feeling bad about excluding right now, but lots of great stuff in there.
That's so cool. Well, congratulations on that. That's awesome that you were able to.
Yeah, and I just want to give a shout out. Hell yeah, I just want to give a shout out to my friend Joy, who was the one that was really instrumental in putting this together and really did the lion's share of the work, and it's very impressive. So thank you so much, Joy.
Thank you, Joy, wherever you are. I hope you're listening. Joy, I think you should make sure to subscribe to my podcast now that we said your name 3 times.
Yes. If she hasn't already, then I'm not sure.
Bug her. You have mentioned the word hyposigil a few times related to the Green Mushroom Project. What is that? What's a hyposigil?
Oh, thank you. It's actually hyphosigil.
Hypho. What's a hyphosigil?
Yes, hypho. Hypho is actually from the word web, right? Hypho as in hyphae, as in fungal hyphae.
Oh my God! So it's like a fungal. Oh, it's like the stuff that they use in Star Trek Discovery, the fungal network.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we sort of, I have a history, my background is in biology and stuff. So when I go to build things magically, a lot of times I will look to these like models that I see working in the broader world.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like this idea of the interconnected relationship, this, mutualistic relationship that is shared by certain fungi and certain trees.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of idea of this magical network being like this underground mycelial web that, kind of strengthens and connects and, helps this forest, which is the practitioners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really cool idea. I suppose, and the word itself probably makes more sense if you've heard of hypersigils. That's why I immediately thought I heard hypo, but
no, it's definitely related to that. It's kind of a hypersigil, but it's a hyphosigil because it's fungally branded.
Yeah, I guess it is making me think like we might. I wonder if we skipped ahead too quickly on chaos magic. Should we talk a little bit more about some of the basic practices? Like everybody knows about sigils, but there's also, like servitors and the hypersigil, which is kind of a newer one, I guess. Maybe not.
I mean, a lot of people
have been around for a while.
Well, yeah, a lot of people look to Grant Morrison's work. I know that he's usually credited with coining the term in relation to his work, The Invisibles. But yeah, we can talk about all of that stuff. I would be happy to answer any of those questions.
Well, well, thanks. I will carefully assemble some questions. They will be flying into your ears any second now. Yeah, well, let's talk about the hypersigil. I mean, I'm a huge Grant Morrison fan. I've read Invisibles a dozen times probably. For a while, it was like the sort of thing I would read the whole thing once a year. I'm not sure that it helped my life much, but but it's such an amazing story. So yeah, tell us what a hypersigil is. What the heck is a hypersigil?
Okay, so in a nutshell, the way that I think about it, and I think the way that Grant Morrison talks about it in relation to the Invisibles, is that it's basically what you're doing is you're setting up a sort of creative project of some kind. Here it was this comic book, but other people will do it with other things like a painting or anything. It can be anything. But what you're doing is you're sort of using this as like a mirror for the bigger world. And so the idea is that there's some kind of a link between this project, this magical link between this project and the greater world. There's all kinds of different thoughts about what that could look like. But the idea is that the changes that you make to this smaller world will be reflected in the larger one. Kind of, basic as above, so below stuff, I think that, in thinking about this kind of thing, and I think that there might be some places where you can find intersection with like the kind of thinking that underlies the law of attraction stuff, which I'm really not a fan of just because of like the culture that surrounds it is very gross and materialistic. And it's like, oh, use this, to get a house with it. It's just, but the actual tech I've played with it seems to work out okay. And I think that it has something to do with what's happening with the hypersigils. Just a suspicion of mine,
though. Suspicious hypersigils. That would be a good name for a book. All right, cool. Well, so you think, do you sort of look at the Green Mushroom Project itself? Do you look at the hyphosigil as a type of hypersigil at all? Or I guess it's kind of different, huh?
I think it's a little bit more of like a meta hyphosigil. Part of the idea is to encourage people to like use this kind of tech, So yeah. It's it turtles all the way down, my friend. I don't know.
Just stick meta in front of it. Okay, all right. Well, that's cool. Yeah, the Green Mushroom Project. And also, there's a Green Mushroom Podcast network, right? Which is that something you run?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody actually runs it. It runs itself. It's a loose anarchic amalgamation of different occult and semi-adjacent. We have a lot of paranormal shows on there too, which is very fun. So yeah, it's a fun way that we can collaborate together and share our knowledge and just have a good time. So yeah.
I've tried to find more about it just by looking online. Is there? Do you guys have like a website that lists all the podcasts that are part of the network or anything?
We used to. We're working on getting that back. Things have been a little bit in flux, but it's cool. I mentioned the word anarchistic tonight.
Yeah, I did. Well, that explains why I had difficulty figuring out more about it. Cool. Well, yeah, so I guess for anybody listening, don't try looking up the Green Mushroom Podcast Project.
You can
Just
find links to all of the shows on my link tree.
Your link tree, okay. All right. Yeah, okay. Well, you know what time it is now?
What time?
It's time for a bibliomancy break. Do you have your D&D dice?
Oh, shit. Yeah, okay. Let's do it. Let me go grab them. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay,
nice.
I have a stack of 4 unusual books. Do you want to roll a 4-sider to see which one we'll use?
Absolutely.
All right. Do you want me to tell you what the options are so you can think about what number you want to roll?
Okay, sure. I can try.
Okay. All right. First, I've got Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David Neal. Then I have Naked Song, which is a collection of mystical Kashmiri poetry by Lala. Then I've got The Interior Castle by Saint Teresa of Avila. And then finally, The Singing Creek Where the Willows Grow by Opal Whiteley.
All right, fantastic. I'm going to try to go for I love poetry, so I'm going to try to go for, what was it, The Naked Song?
Naked Song, yeah. Although Singing Creek, that's also kind of poetry too. Okay. All right. So you want a 2 or a 4?
I'm sure whichever one comes up will be excellent. All right, I've rolled number 1.
Ooh, Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David Neal. This is the book that introduced the idea of tulpas to the West.
Oh, fantastic. Very cool.
So how do we do this next part? Do you want to ask a question? I totally should have had you ask a question ahead of time, huh?
No worries. Let's see here.
Before we started. Okay. All right. Do you have a question, or are we just going to see what the book burbles up?
Let's see here. I think I would like a little bit of direction on how to proceed with the project I've just started.
Okay. All right. And then how do we do this next part? Should I just flip through the book randomly?
Yeah, the way that I do it is I hold the question in my mind and I flip through the book, and then when I get the impulse, I stick my finger somewhere on the page and I start reading from there.
Okay, well, this is a little weird. As soon as one has imagined Dorji Naljorma springing from the syllable ma, one must identify oneself with her. When one has become the deity, one imagines the letter A placed on the navel and the letter Ha at the top of one's head.
All right. I love it.
Does that help at all?
I think it might. Actually, thank you.
Good.
There was actually a lot there for me. Thank you.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Oh, I should have marked the spot, huh? So I could. Well, you know what? We'll never know. We'll never know where that was in the book.
Well, at least we have it on tape.
Oh, yeah, true. I forgot we're recording. How did it feel? How did the bibliomancy turnabout feel? Were you sort of like, oh my god, I didn't bring my D&D dice to a podcasting session? What am I thinking?
I was so excited. Anytime I get the chance to roll my polyhedral dice, I'm happy.
Okay, so let's see. The next thing that I think we should talk about is your second album of ritually produced aural erotica, which is something that I never thought I would say out loud. Aural erotica.
Yeah, I thought the wordplay would be funny.
I
But of course,
to...
aural is referring to sound, not oral as in
well, I
referring
didn't
to the mouth.
say
But yes.
oral, but I know that my West Coast accent murders vowels, so I apologize to those of you
Well,
listening.
and sometimes, these podcasting apps don't always have the greatest sound quality, or you never know. So just to be clear, it's aural, A-U-R.
It's ear-based erotica, not mouth-based erotica.
Yeah, not mouth, you pervert. Ear.
What do you think this is, a dick joke?
It's for your ears.
Yes. And also, we should tell you, don't listen to it too loudly or you'll damage your ears. Make sure you use protection, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be safe out there.
Yeah. So this is your second album of this. I listened to a little bit of it. You sent me a link when we were first planning, which feels like a long time. It's taken us a while to get around to recording, but it was pretty good. I mean, I don't mean to sound surprised. I mean to give you praise. It's an excellent album.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
But you said it's your second, which means that there was a first. How did the first go? Was the first successful?
Yeah, this is something that I did as a magical working. This isn't really something that I did in terms of...
Holy shit, is it a hypersigil?
I don't know. Maybe.
Is.
Everything's a fucking hypersigil. If you really want to get into the semantics of it. You're just a hypersigil that your parents made. No. But yes, this is actually something that I guess it's successful in terms of the reason that I made it was to be a magical working, which was successful. I don't consider myself to be like a musician this is really my first stab at like making music. I sort of taught myself how to mess around with Audacity and produce these weird electronic, tracks
noises
and stuff. And so, yeah, the idea of selling it or anything like that was just something that like crossed my line. This is just purely a sort of magical creative project that I did put out there, and I think I would say that I feel like it's been a success because there's been a lot of feedback from people, like having listened to it and having like read the essay that I put out with it, sort of explaining the rationale and everything that went into it. There were a lot of people that reached out to me and said that they had used it for doing similar work that I used it for, in terms of like doing this kind of body work, dissolving trauma, releasing shame, while at the same time, like, making new definitions for yourself. And there's a lot of folks that reached out to me that said that it had been helpful for them in terms of their own practice doing things like that. And so, yeah, that was something that I felt really good about for sure.
Cool. That sounds awesome. Can I link to that in the show notes also?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Good. I think people will really enjoy it. It's I don't know how to really describe the genre of music. I mean, I guess it's electronic music, but that's pretty much all music now.
Yeah.
It's not rap.
I do not rap in it. It's true.
That's for the third album.
Yeah, well, yes, we'll see. We'll see how dark I get, in terms of what like things I'm exploring. Because what I wanted to do with this second album is really to try to kind of push my comfort zone in terms of like going to some places that I didn't really feel comfortable with the first one. And so I wanted to sort of like embrace this kind of shadow energy and sort of, do that kind of work in terms of like embracing that and everything. So the second one definitely, I think, to me, has a different feel because of what I was working on during it. Although I think maybe to people that like listen to them, they might sound pretty similar. Unclear. So the second one, like I was using the same kind of technique as I developed with the first one, which is a recursive process of recording these tracks, like, recording these tracks, doing these sex magic rituals. And while you are performing the next one, you're listening to what you've recorded before. So it's this kind of recursive process of like building up this like feedback loop. And so I wanted to sort of like take that to another place because, when you're messing around with things like this, well, any creative project, but the more layers of complexity you throw into a thing, the more kind of funky emergent things seem to start to pop out of it. And I was feeling like a real desire to sort of play with that in a more direct way with the second album. with that sort of like emergent property and really sort of
yeah, that
connect with it.
That can be a really strange thing with music, because also there's like some weird line where like you cross it, you add too many layers and suddenly it's muddy. But yeah, I think I've mentioned this before. My younger brother is a musician, and he's been really getting into sort of, composing his own songs and putting all this stuff together, and listening to him talk about, adding and subtracting from songs as he's sort of, mixing them together. What you just said reminds me of what he has talked about before, but it's, the listening to your previous work while creating the new work, that's got to be a strange experience.
Yes, it definitely was strange. For sure. It's very strange. But it's been interesting for sure. And this sort of idea of like, you get this sense of really having this congress with it, right? In doing this practice. And through this, I started to feel this sense of like, as I said, this emergent thing that wanted to be expressed, that wanted to sort of, come out into the world in new and interesting ways. And so I decided to attempt an experiment with this second project where I would design and create a sound magic track, which was specifically for the purpose of allowing the kind of entity within this music to inhabit a ritually prepared object. So to sort of like haunt an object with this, sound magic track.
Right.
And so I tried this with a few different items. So I tried this with a couple of different items, things that I thought would be good contenders because they were designed with like having a musical interface in mind. So the first thing I tried it out with was a sex toy, which you can play music through on an app.
Jeez.
And so
I didn't know such a thing existed, and I shouldn't feel surprised, but I'm kind of like, oh, what? Okay, whatever.
Yeah, okay, so haunted sex toy, that's something you can make if you want to.
I totally predicted that you were going to haunt a sex toy. I just didn't think that it would be a musical one.
Yeah, well, it's not musical per se. This is just one of its many fabulous features.
Is it MIDI? Is it a MIDI sex toy?
It's a keytar. It's a giant keytar that you ride on.
There'll be a link to it in the show notes.
I'll post some pictures.
All right, sex keytar. I'm writing that down.
Sex keytar. It's a fantastic band name.
Okay, so musical sex toy that may or may not be a keytar. Did the haunting stick?
I think that it was successful. I tried it out a few times before I performed the initialization ritual for this process. And after I did this ritual, it had a completely different feel to it. It was actually the first time it was very surprising that I was like, wow, this worked a lot better than I thought it would, and it's quite surprising. So that having been an interesting kind of, thing to play around with, I thought it would be interesting to allow this thing to inhabit something that wasn't so single purpose, perhaps.
It's dual purposed. It's also a musical instrument.
That's right. I forgot it was a guitar. Apologies. But so I there is a children's toy that is kind of Furby adjacent, which is sort of musically based, and I decided it's called a Rismo. So I decided to make a haunted Rismo with this track as well, and that was like where things got a little bit creepier. But it's been interesting, and as a sort of before I released this project, I put an element into each one of the tracks that was like kind of a seal to keep it contained in there, just because it doesn't seem like it would be a good idea to have this kind of thing happening unintentionally or spontaneously. Not that I think it's like bad or dangerous or whatever. It just, good to be intentional about
Yeah.
things.
So
yes.
is there a way for listeners or for users of your music to haunt something still, or is it pretty locked in there?
If people are interested in playing around with that tech, I can send you a MP3 of the track without the thing in it.
Man, I don't know. I really like my guitars non-possessed, but maybe we'll have to check that out.
Yeah, if people are interested, I mean, I'd be curious to hear what results if people start playing around with it.
Are you? So it sounds like the process of creating this album has been sort of intense and has involved some strange experimentation. Is it a practice that you're going to continue? Do you think is there going to be a third album?
Unclear. I'm definitely taking a break. This last one was, as you said, intense, and I'm still writing the essay that accompanies it, and I'm kind of taking my time and wanting to do that in a way that's very intentional and stuff. I suspect, knowing myself, that I probably will make more of this type of stuff. I'm not sure if I'll do a whole nother album, if I'll want to maybe switch directions and maybe try to, do something with a different technique or something like that. But it's something that I have really enjoyed, and it's definitely helped me to broaden my comfort zone by putting something so personal and weird out there. Like, I really never thought that I would ever do anything like that. I used to be like a very, very shy, reserved person who was honestly too, socially awkward or nervous to even sort of like make a podcast at all. So even making the podcast is part of this kind of process too of just trying to,
and let's talk about that a little bit, because you have you've gone from just making podcasts, like you've got another podcast that's all about like sex magic and stuff, or sex, or I totally forgot. You have 3 podcasts. One of them is with your brother doing drunk history. Is that you? That's you.
Sometimes we're drunk. It's mostly just about history.
And sometimes it's history.
No, it's basically, my brother is a real history buff, and he really like loves studying history and talking about it. And so this is like a really fun opportunity for me to fill in what I feel like are some huge gaps in my education when it comes to history, to hang out with my brother, for us to, have these fun conversations and get to share them with people. And sometimes we have fun guests as well. So that's called Ad Hoc History. And the other podcast is actually, again, another sort of magical working that me and some friends were working on. We haven't made an episode of this thing in a while, but this was something, it's called Smuts Up. It's a sex comedy podcast. It's definitely a comedy podcast. It's not something that you should listen to if you're interested in becoming more educated about sexuality or anything like that. If you want to listen to a bunch of very stupid jokes and hear people talk about the Matrix, that's a good way to go.
Yeah. But I mean, that just sounds like the sort of topic that a shy person or a reserved person would not tackle when it comes to podcasting.
Yes, and it definitely, I think that you can hear in the earlier episodes like how very, very uncomfortable all of us are doing this. But like through that process, like a lot of us were able to like make what we felt like was some pretty cool personal steps. Like one of the people that was working on the project came out as being trans and started to transition, and like there's all kinds of cool things that like happened while we were doing. I'm not saying it was because of that, but like just things that happened during that, like
it was a hypersigil.
Well, when you start to like push your boundaries, when you start to give yourself permission to like, challenge these definitions that maybe other people have given you, you really can unlock a lot of potential for yourself. And so, yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, as an outsider watching these things sort of unfurl. I can't remember when I mean, you mentioned Ad Hoc History a lot on your podcast, and I don't remember where I heard about Smuts Up. It might have been when you were being interviewed by Doug or something like that. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you did a sex magic episode with Doug.
Yes, you can hear me talk to Douglas Batchelor on his excellent show, What Magic Is This? About sex magic.
Yeah, it's a really good episode, too. I'll make sure that there might be a link to that in the show notes. I might have promised too many links already, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, I was so glad. Yeah, Doug is great. I was so glad to join him for that.
Yeah, he is great. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's... I've come to the end of my my notes. I don't have any more questions for you. Do you have any questions that you think I should have asked? Like, what did I forget to ask you? That's my last question.
I feel like I did a terrible job describing chaos magic, the Green Mushroom Project, and to some extent my album. So, but hopefully...
Well, no, I feel like the album was described well. I think that we did a good job with. I think the Green Mushroom Project... so let's go back to that for a second. So one of the things... Yeah, actually, this is something that I did want to talk about. So you were talking about, like, the color green being the thing that kind of, like, draws... that you're drawing a lot of symbolism from, right? It's not just the mushroom half, the green half is also important. And you mentioned Venus and probably some other things. Can you tell us a little bit, like, when you're talking about sort of like green symbolism there and the Venus stuff, like, is that also sort of tied into sex magic working, or are you looking at other aspects of Venus? Like, what are you doing with what is the Green Mushroom Project doing with that?
So the reason why I brought up Venus with green there is coming from something that is in Liber Chaos by Peter J. Carroll.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was like the people that I sort of like were working with at the time to, you know, pitch this idea. This was a system that they were really familiar with. So this was a good way of sort of like saying, okay, it's green magic, which is in this system sort of like contextualized as being, quote, friendship magic or Venusian magic. So this idea of something that's kind of about harmony, about not exactly about cohesion like you would think about with Jupiter per se, but about, you know, chillness within the domain, you know, like the sort of diffusion of tension, the opposite of what you would expect from something that's like a lot of blunt force trauma, you know?
Right.
And so, but there's other aspects to the color green that I think are kind of interesting too, like just in terms of a sort of like psychological understanding of it, like seeing it does seem to promote a sense of well-being in people. There's all kinds, you know, the idea of environmentalism is very important to a lot of people involved in the project as well. So that's an aspect that, you know, is also a uniting factor.
Yeah, that's, I think, kind of, that's sort of, I think, what I thought of first, especially since, you know, green mushroom, like you immediately sort of think of some sort of environmental connection, or at least that's the first impression I had. And then when you brought up the Venus stuff, I was like, oh yeah, of course, like green is the color of Venus. Like that's a pretty traditional one going back even before chaos magic. You know, Venus and green are intimately tied together. And then I was sort of thinking about, like, you know, Venus and Eros have this like really strong symbolism, like the power over love is kind of like the binding force. You know, this is something that stretches back at least to Renaissance magic, where Eros is sort of viewed as you know, the one and only binding force. Like, it's not just romantic love, but it's like how Scotch tape works and how gravity works and how the universe stays together and how the universe operates. You know, it's love is both binding and repelling. You know, it's why the planets don't fly into the sun, but it's also why they stick around. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting symbolism there. I did just sort of gloss over it when you said it, and now I feel like I did a poor job interviewing you about the color green.
Well, I don't think that's the case at all. And I like what you said about the, you know, love and Eros and everything. And I think that there's definitely some of that too. And then the idea of the mushroom being a saprotroph is really important to us as well. This is something that, you know, is involved in the death process. It feeds off of death, but it also does it in a transformative way. And so like a lot of what we think about in terms of the saprotroph nature of the mushroom is like this sort of alchemical process where we can give it things that we can't, you know, take or we can't carry or whatever, and it can transform those things for us into other stuff that we can. So. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot to kind of like the otherness of mushrooms. You know, funguses are such a they're a form of life that we as you know,
breathing mammals have a difficult time really understanding or, I guess, identifying with. Unless you sit around for too much and you start to grow some, I guess.
Yeah, they really are fascinating. I mean, even just from a biological perspective, it's not uncommon for fungi to have like multiple nuclei from different entities. They're very like promiscuous in terms of exchanging genetic information and stuff like that. It's very, very much about information being exchanged, which I just love.
Yeah. Oh, and of course, I'm sure, especially since we're dealing with occultists and magicians, a lot of people see the mushroom part and think immediately of hallucinogens.
Sure. I mean, that's something that some people are into for sure. I think that the idea of consciousness expanding is something that comes up with mushrooms in general, or I've seen a lot of association with, psychological, excuse me. I've seen a lot of association with like psychological healing in mushrooms, as well as we're starting to now legally be able to experiment with like treating things like depression and stuff with microdosing psilocybin. And yeah, so now that research is allowed to go forward, I think we're seeing a lot more potential about what these guys can do for us.
Yeah, which is exciting. Yeah, okay, and now let's wrap this all up by explaining what chaos magic is.
All right.
Well, hold on. I have a question for you. I do have a question for you. In your show, when you do your bibliomancy break, you usually have a little invocation of Eris. So that has always made me wonder, do you consider yourself a Discordian? And do you think that Discordianism and chaos magic have a good buddy system going on? Or something?
Well, first of all, I would never admit to being a Discordian. If anybody tells you they're a Discordian, you should never fucking believe them. Right. Just kidding. I think there's a lot of fun history there. I think there's a lot of intersection. I think we look at Principia Discordia. There's a lot of fun things in there. There's also a lot of things in there that maybe haven't aged very well. And
oh, yeah.
That's true of many in occult text, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of some of the philosophies, there's some good intersection there. I wouldn't say that it's like a pancake stack, but in terms of a Venn diagram, there's definitely an intersection. Yeah,
I guess that's sort of how I would look at it too. It just, I guess, I came across the Principia Discordia back in the mid 90s and just fell in love with it. Like it was one of those books that kind of cracked my head open, I think, a little bit. But just the fact that Eris, as a goddess of chaos, she seems like a pretty good fit for chaos magic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good touchstone for sure.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, including the Haunted Sex Guitar, which might be the title of the episode. I haven't really.
If there's any illustrators listening, I would love to see a picture of this drawing.
Yes, please. If you can draw us a picture of a haunted sex guitar and send it in.
That would be magnificent.
Yes,
and if you want to learn more about chaos magic, please listen to my podcast, Lux Occult.
Yes.
There's several episodes which are entitled, Explaining Chaos Magic to My Brother, in which I attempt to explain chaos magic to my brother.
One of the things that people should understand about chaos magic is there is kind of a system to it. The name itself, chaos magic, makes it sound like there wouldn't be any sort of system there. It would just be a jumble of things. But there is kind of a system and an approach in chaos magic. So yeah, definitely listen to the Lux Occult Podcast and learn all the juicy details of it.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot more theory behind what could appear to be a very kooky practice.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, parts of it are pretty kooky.
Absolutely.
But,
but that is true of most practices if we look at it with unbiased eyes, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of my listeners are probably kind of more along the ceremonial magic grimoire type, and I would just like to remind you that you probably have spent a day this month standing in a bathrobe in a magic circle talking to your imaginary friends.
I fully support it.
I do too. It's just chaos magicians deserve a break too. Well, thank you so much. Okay, so you have a link tree that has all of your. It's basically all of your links for everything, and it's what is it? It's linktree / something.
Lux
something.
Strata, yes,
Lux
and I will
Strata.
give you a link to that. Where
That will also be in the show notes. And then, and so you've got your music to check out. There's the Green Mushroom Project zine, which everybody should check out. The Lux Occult Podcast, which is excellent and has more laughing than this one does. So you'll enjoy that, dear listener. And then, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. This is fun. I'm sorry that it took us so long to arrange this, because I think we started talking about interviewing each other or something like a year ago or something. It feels like a long time ago.
Well, I'm happy that it's finally happened. This has been a great time. I really appreciate you having me on and everything.
This has been another episode of the Arnemancy Podcast. Thank you for joining me. I have been your host, Reverend Eric. You can find Arnemancy online at arnemancy.com, and you can subscribe to this podcast anywhere podcasts are found. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the Arnemancy Project for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy.